Picture this, it's 1692, somewhere in Massachusetts, and the temperature outside has dropped to what feels like the ninth circle of frozen hell. You're huddled in a wooden house that seems about as sturdy as a house of cards, listening to the wind howl through gaps you could probably stick your finger through. Now here's the thing that might surprise you. You're not just surviving this winter, you're actually staying reasonably warm. While we tend to think of colonial Americans as constantly shivering pioneers who barely made it through each winter by sheer luck and determination, the reality was far more ingenious. These settlers, many of whom had never experienced winters quite this brutal back in Europe, developed architectural solutions that would make modern engineers nod with respect. We're talking about heating systems that could warm an entire house using nothing but physics and rocks, insulation techniques that worked better than some modern materials, and building designs so clever they're still being studied today. But here's what's really fascinating, and this is something most history books completely skip over. These weren't just random improvements stumbled upon by desperate people. Colonial builders created an entire science of winter survival architecture, combining old world knowledge with new world necessity in ways that saved thousands of lives. If you're interested in how people survived extreme conditions using nothing but ingenuity and available materials, make sure you're subscribed because we dive deep into these forgotten survival techniques that actually worked. The first thing you need to understand about colonial winter survival is that these settlers faced a problem that would terrify most modern homeowners. Imagine trying to heat a house when your only fuel source is whatever wood you can chop yourself. Your insulation consists of whatever materials you can scavenge or make by hand, and your heating system needs to work for months without any modern controls or safety features. Oh, and if you mess up, you don't just get a high heating bill, you freeze to death. Colonial builders started with what they knew from Europe, but quickly discovered that American winters were an entirely different beast. The techniques that worked in England's relatively mild climate were about as useful as a chocolate teapot when facing a New England blizzard. So they adapted, and what they came up with was nothing short of brilliant. The foundation of colonial winter architecture literally started underground. These weren't people who just threw up some walls and hoped for the best. Colonial builders understood something that modern construction sometimes forgets. The earth itself is your friend when it comes to temperature control. They dug their foundations deep, often 3 to 4 feet down, creating what we now call thermal mass. The ground temperature at that depth stays relatively constant year-round, usually around 50 to 55 degrees Fahrenheit. But here's where it gets really clever. They didn't just dig down and call it good. Colonial builders created what they called banking, which involved piling earth, stones, and organic matter around the foundation walls. This wasn't just to keep drafts out, though it certainly did that. This banking created an insulation barrier that could reduce heat loss through the foundation by up to 40%. Modern energy efficiency experts have tested reconstructed colonial foundations and found that this simple technique was nearly as effective as some contemporary insulation methods. The walls themselves tell an even more interesting story. While we picture colonial houses as simple wooden structures, the reality was far more sophisticated. Most colonial homes used what's called post and beam construction, but the spaces between those massive wooden posts weren't just filled with whatever was handy. Colonial builders developed a technique called nogging, filling wall cavities with a carefully planned mixture of materials. The most common nogging material was something called cat and clay, a mixture of chopped straw, clay, and sometimes animal hair that created surprisingly effective insulation. But the really smart builders went further. They created layered wall systems with an inner layer of clay and straw, a middle layer of stones or bricks for thermal mass, and an outer layer of wooden clapboards that shed water while allowing the wall to breathe. Archaeological studies of preserved colonial walls have shown that these multi-layer systems could maintain interior temperatures up to 15 degrees warmer than the outside air, even without any active heating. That might not sound like much, but when you're talking about the difference between 20 degrees and 35 degrees, you're literally talking about the difference between life and death. Now let's talk about what might be the most ingenious aspect of colonial winter architecture, the central chimney system. Modern houses scatter their heating sources around, a furnace in the basement, maybe a fireplace in the living room, radiators or vents in different rooms. Colonial builders took the opposite approach, and it was absolutely brilliant. The typical colonial house was built around a massive central chimney that could weigh several tons and contain multiple fireboxes. This wasn't just about convenience, though having all your fires in one place certainly made maintenance easier. This central chimney acted like a giant thermal battery, absorbing heat during the day and radiating it throughout the house for hours after the fires died down. The positioning was crucial. By placing this thermal mass at the center of the house, heat radiated outward in all directions. The chimney stack itself became a heating system, with the warm masonry transferring heat to adjacent rooms through the walls. Some colonial chimneys were so large that they contained small chambers where people could actually sit inside the chimney structure to warm up, the original heated seating area. But the real genius was in the flue design. Colonial builders didn't just run straight pipes up through their chimneys. They created serpentine pathways that forced hot gases to travel longer routes before exiting, extracting every possible bit of heat from the combustion process. Some colonial chimneys had flue systems so complex that modern chimney sweeps need special training to clean them properly. The firebox design itself was a masterpiece of practical engineering. Unlike modern fireplaces that are designed primarily for ambiance, colonial fireboxes were built for maximum heat output and efficiency. They were typically much larger than modern fireplaces. Some could accommodate logs 6 feet long, but they were also much shallower, which reflected more heat into the room rather than sending it up the chimney. Many colonial fireplaces included what they called a fireback, a cast iron plate at the rear of the firebox that absorbed heat and radiated it back into the room. These firebacks could continue warming a room for hours after the fire died down. Some wealthy colonists imported elaborately decorated firebacks from Europe, but most were simple, functional pieces that prioritized heat retention over aesthetics. The andirons, those metal supports that held the logs, weren't just functional either. Colonial andirons were often designed with large, heavy bases that absorbed heat during the fire and continued radiating warmth afterward. Everything in a colonial fireplace was designed to capture, store, and slowly release heat. Window placement and design in colonial houses reveals another layer of sophisticated thinking about winter survival. While we might assume that colonial builders just cut holes in walls wherever they needed light, the reality was much more strategic. Windows were positioned to maximize solar gain during winter months while minimizing heat loss. Colonial builders understood the sun's path throughout the year and positioned their largest windows to face south, capturing maximum sunlight during the short winter days. But they also knew that windows were major sources of heat loss, so they developed several techniques to minimize this problem. The most common solution was the use of heavy wooden shutters, not just on the outside, but on the inside as well. These interior shutters created an air gap between the window glass and the room, providing an extra layer of insulation. Some colonial houses had shutters that were specifically designed to be closed during the coldest parts of winter, essentially sealing off windows entirely when light wasn't as important as heat retention. Window glass itself was expensive and often of poor quality, so many colonial builders used alternative materials during winter months. Oiled paper, thin sheets of horn, or even animal bladders were stretched across window openings, providing some light while offering better insulation than the available glass. These temporary winter windows could be easily replaced when damaged and provided surprisingly effective protection against drafts. The most ingenious colonial builders created what we might call seasonal architecture, features that could be modified based on the time of year. Some houses had removable wall panels that could be replaced with heavier, more insulated versions during winter. Others had adjustable roof systems that could be modified to better shed snow or capture solar heat. Roof design in colonial architecture was far more sophisticated than it might appear. The steep, pitched roofs we associate with colonial houses weren't just aesthetic choices. They were carefully calculated responses to winter conditions. The steep angle served multiple purposes. It shed snow quickly, preventing dangerous accumulations that could collapse the structure. It created large attic spaces that acted as insulation buffers, and it allowed for better air circulation that prevented ice dams and moisture problems. But the really clever part was what colonial builders did with those attic spaces. Rather than leaving them empty, many colonial houses used the attic as a thermal buffer zone. Heat from the living spaces below would rise into the attic, creating a warm air cushion that insulated the house from above. Some builders even created systems to direct warm air from the central chimney into the attic space, essentially turning the entire upper level of the house into a giant insulation system. The materials used for roofing also reflected sophisticated understanding of thermal properties. While thatch was common in early colonial construction, builders in colder climates quickly switched to wooden shingles or slate tiles that provided better insulation and durability. The thickness of these roofing materials was carefully calculated, thick enough to provide insulation, but not so thick as to create structural problems or prevent snow from sliding off. Floor construction in colonial houses reveals another aspect of their winter survival strategy. Modern houses typically have basements or crawl spaces that can become sources of cold air infiltration. Colonial builders often used a technique called summer beam construction, where massive wooden beams supported floors that were essentially suspended above the ground level. The space beneath these floors wasn't wasted. It was often filled with insulating materials, stones, clay, organic matter, or even just trapped air. Some colonial houses had floors that were essentially double-layered, with an air gap between the structural floor and the finished surface that provided additional insulation. The most sophisticated colonial houses included what we might call thermal zoning, different areas of the house designed for different temperature ranges. The kitchen, with its large fireplace and constant cooking fires, was typically the warmest room and often served as the family gathering space during the coldest weather. Bedrooms were designed to be cooler, with the understanding that people would use heavy bedding and shared body heat to stay warm while sleeping. Some colonial houses included what they called warming rooms, small spaces adjacent to the main fireplace that could be heated to very high temperatures for specific purposes. These might be used for drying clothes, warming food, or providing a space where someone suffering from cold exposure could safely warm up without shocking their system. The integration of workspaces into the thermal design of colonial houses was particularly clever. Many houses included workshops, weaving rooms, or other work areas positioned to take advantage of waste heat from the main heating system. The physical activity of work combined with residual heat from the central chimney created comfortable working conditions even during the coldest weather. Storage areas in colonial houses were also designed with thermal considerations in mind. Root cellars were positioned to take advantage of stable ground temperatures, keeping food from freezing while also preventing spoilage. Grain storage areas were often located in the warmest, driest parts of the house to prevent moisture problems that could ruin winter food supplies. The social aspects of colonial winter architecture shouldn't be overlooked either. Houses were designed to bring families together in the warmest spaces during cold weather. The concept of individual heated bedrooms was virtually unknown. Families gathered in common areas where shared body heat and communal fires provided warmth and comfort. What's perhaps most impressive about colonial winter architecture is how these techniques evolved and improved over time. Early colonial builders learned from their mistakes, and successful innovations spread quickly through communities. By the mid-17th century, colonial houses in cold climates had become remarkably sophisticated structures that could maintain comfortable living conditions even during the harshest winters. Modern testing of reconstructed colonial heating systems has shown that a well-designed colonial house could maintain interior temperatures of 65 to 70 degrees Fahrenheit even when outside temperatures dropped below zero. This was achieved using nothing but wood fuel, natural materials, and clever design. No electricity, no fossil fuels, no modern insulation materials. The efficiency of these systems was remarkable. A typical colonial house might use 15 to 20 cords of wood per winter, a substantial amount, but far less than you might expect for heating a house through a New England winter using only wood fires. The key was in the design of the heating system and the thermal properties of the building itself. Perhaps most importantly, these architectural solutions were developed by people who couldn't afford to make mistakes. There were no backup heating systems, no emergency services to call if something went wrong. The architecture had to work reliably and efficiently, or people died. This necessity drove innovations that were often more effective than modern solutions that rely on abundant energy and complex technology. The legacy of colonial winter architecture can still be seen today. Many of the techniques developed by colonial builders, thermal mass, passive solar design, natural insulation materials, integrated heating systems, are being rediscovered by modern architects interested in sustainable, energy-efficient design. The next time you're adjusting your thermostat or complaining about your heating bill, remember those colonial builders who created warm, comfortable homes using nothing but wood, stone, clay, and brilliant design. They prove that with enough ingenuity and understanding of basic physics, humans can create comfortable living spaces even in the harshest conditions. These weren't just survival techniques, they were sophisticated architectural solutions that worked so well they kept entire communities alive through winters that would challenge even our modern heating systems. The fact that many of these colonial houses are still standing and still comfortable today, centuries later, is a testament to the effectiveness of these time-tested methods. What other historical survival techniques would you like to see explored? Drop your suggestions in the comments below, and if you enjoyed learning about these ingenious colonial solutions, hit that subscribe button and the notification bell. We've got plenty more forgotten wisdom from history that might just change how you think about the challenges we face today.